All right, this week on the podcast, I'm bringing on the biggest news talk radio show host in the state of Alabama, Leland Whaley. We're going to hear his story, and then we're going to dive into Alabama politics, talking about the governor's race with Tuberville possibly putting his hat in the ring, and Ainsworth's response to that. We're going to talk education and a bunch of other Alabama political things. But then we're going to break down the Ukraine situation in a way that you've never heard before, and then we're going to wrap by talking about the largest global power race in the history of the world. We have an incredible culture here in the state of Alabama, but our politics and public policy don't reflect the people of Alabama. Media drives culture. Culture is what drives politics and public policy. Welcome, everyone, to 1819 News, the podcast. I'm Bryan Dawson, CEO of 1819 News, and host of this here podcast, where we're in pursuit of a free and flourishing Alabama every single week. And as I always say, this week is no different because that's what we do each and every week. Got a great episode for you guys today. Bringing on someone I'm a huge fan of. I come from the radio world, and I recognize radio talent when I see it. And we're bringing on the biggest radio show host in the state of Alabama that's not syndicated, Leland Whaley, host of Leland Live on Talk 99.5 in Birmingham, who's been absolutely killing it for a very long time there. Just a rare radio talent, and it comes from years of experience in the political world, and just having talent. And so we're going to talk to him about his story, how he got into politics, what he did, and how that transferred into a radio career. But then we're going to dive into some issues. And he wrote an op-ed for us recently. He's written a couple. The one on Katie Britt got a few clicks, like 50,000. The phone bank shut down there in D.C. That was a good time. And then the next one was on shutting down the DC factory. And I think when I read that, man, I was like, wow, he's got his finger on the pulse of why Trump won in a landslide in this election, going after the forgotten working class, these people who've been basically hurt by this open society idea of global markets and all this other stuff. And so we're going to dive into that. But before we dive into any of it, and I even introduce Leland, I have to sell you things. So I'm going to do that.
Do it.
Yeah. And not really. I'm not even going to ask you guys for anything. I don't want you to buy anything. I just want you, as we work to rebuild our YouTube empire, I just need you to go and like the show on YouTube. Go to 1819 Podcast on YouTube. Click like, comment, follow, share, all of those things. That is how you can help us get this very important message out to as many people in Alabama as possible so we can take over the state. So please go do that. Definitely like, share, subscribe, whatever the buttons are, do that. And without further ado, we're going to jump in and welcome Leland Whaley. Thanks for coming in.
I appreciate the sales pitch. You know, I do that all day, right? People think I'm a political commentator.
Yeah.
I sell furniture and air conditioners every day.
That's right.
That's part of living in the free world. We're not NPR.
Yeah.
We don't beg.
Yes.
How you doing?
Good.
Thanks for having me in.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, on that note, it's worth talking about the most powerful marketing tool, I think, in any form of media or anything else is a host endorsement. The host endorsement from a trusted radio show host, or if you have a big enough podcast, the world runs off, I know a guy, right?
Sure.
The world runs off, I know a guy.
Personal reference. Sure.
And so it's like if someone comes outside and there's a tree down in his driveway and he's got to get to work and the neighbor comes over and he's like, hey, I know a guy that cuts trees. You're like, no, thanks. I'm going to Google it. Or you can be like, oh my God, you know a guy, right? And so you go with the guy that knows a guy.
Exactly.
And that's essentially what you're doing is you've got, this massive audience of people who trust you and you cherish that trust and say, hey, I know a guy that does air conditioning. Hey, I know a guy that does roofing. Hey, I know a guy that whatever. And it's a beautiful thing because, those people need customers and you point them their way. So I think it's a good thing. And I can't wait for my audience in this podcast to get big enough to where I can start doing that. So that's why you guys need to go like, subscribe, share, and all that.
Hit the buttons. Do it. So you and I have gotten to be pretty good friends and have a good appreciation for what each other has accomplished. And I didn't know your backstory. I knew that there was some API in there. I knew that there was some Crawford in there, but I didn't know how to put it all together. And so I want to just start out. I do this with basically everybody new who comes on my podcast is just what's your story, a little bit about you.
How far back do you want me to go? My dad met my mom, and those two fell in love.
I would say, I mean, I do think it matters, where were you born? Yeah. Tell us a little bit about your parents, and then go into how you got into politics.
I was sort of born into the broadcast business. I was born into it. My dad was a pastor when I was born, a young little pastor, 20 years old, scared to death. But he also was given a little weekend radio show. And he did both. He had a church, and he spun records, and he did not want me to get anywhere near this business. But at 15 years old, on a stormy night, he had to fire a guy because a building caught on fire, and the guy didn't cover the news story. We were big on news stories. Yeah. And he was mad because he fired the guy. I was with him that night, and he had to send the guy on because he wasn't doing his job. And he was mad because he had to finish his shift. And I said, I can do it. He goes, you don't know how to do this. I was like, I've been watching you do this since I was born. Yeah. And so I sat down in the chair, and he said, show me. And I put a record on, and I put the needle on, and I turned the mic on. He goes, I'll be back in 3 hours. Don't screw up. And I puked in the trash can, and that was the first time I was ever on the air. Eventually, I talked him into giving me a job. So I worked in a local family radio business for 8 years, paid my way through school at Auburn that way, and then went off into television news. And I did that for about a decade. That's what brought me to Birmingham. I worked over in Columbus, Georgia, and here at what's now Fox 6 in Birmingham. Still a lot of good friends in that business. Somewhere in the mid-'90s, honestly, I got driven crazy about an issue of teacher background checks for child predators. Yeah. And I got really interested. I was always a political nerd and followed policy, but we had a couple of very good representatives that were trying to get these bills passed. A senator named Roger Bedford in 1996 was trying to block those bills. He didn't show up for a committee so he could campaign for U.S. Senate one day, and he left a young kid stiffed who had put his little suit on and was going to brave being around all these important people to tell the story about how his baseball coach molested him to get this bill passed. And Roger Bedford left him hanging. They couldn't have the committee hearing. And everybody had to go home. And I went down there with my TV camera to cover it, and I was pissed. I was pissed off. And shortly after that, I got an invitation to join the Republican Party as their first communication director. They'd never had a PR shop. They didn't. It was a tiny little operation. The Republicans weren't in control back then. So I took that as a chance to get into politics. And from then, I did that for a long time. I did actual campaign work for Congressman Riley in Congress and helped run his first governor's campaign. That was successful. Didn't want to work for state government or be in government anymore. And so somehow I got sucked back into this. And we've had our show for 15 years now. I used to just fill in for some hosts for fun, but that turned into an offer to do a show. And it took a while, but we're doing well, and we love doing what we do. I'll say this, Brian, it's easier to throw rocks than to dodge rocks when you're in the business, when you're in the decision-making role. And I do respect what some of these people do in politics. Yeah. But it's our job to hold them accountable. And I think you feel the same way I do. The people we have the greatest influence to hold accountable are the people on our side. Yeah. It doesn't do for us to just criticize Democrats every day, which I'll have plenty of that on the show today after that speech to Congress last night. Yeah. But our guys need to be held accountable. If they don't do their part, none of this is going to stick. So that's what we do.
No, I think that's exactly right. And I tell people all the time, because I call it Fox News eyes, or Fox News goggles. Yep. Republicans good, Democrats bad. When you're watching Fox News, that's the goggles that you have on. Yep. And then you look down at Montgomery and anywhere in Alabama, and you're like, oh, look, Republican supermajority, we must be good. Back to Fox News, the Democrats, Nancy Pelosi and Vladimir Putin are our enemies. And it's like, no, but it's not Vladimir Putin's fault. We're 52nd in education or whatever. I guess we've supposedly moved up. I'm skeptical, but they're not the reason that our budget has doubled in the last 9 years. They're not it's Republicans doing this.
We've got the same problem in Montgomery in particular. We've got the same problem we had when I was trying to work with those folks for a while. I worked with the Republicans in both chambers, but particularly the Senate. We were in the minority. And I would I'll never forget a night I was standing on top of, what is that big club down there, the Capital City Club, where all the meetings are held. And I was looking out over the Montgomery skyline, and I saw the teachers union building. Yeah. And I thought, if we could ever get the majority, we can get their stranglehold off the state. We can actually do something. I'm standing there in my little suit, playing the role. And little did I know, eventually that majority would come in 2010, and they've squandered it. They're giving the players in that sphere of politics just bought into the other team. They just changed jersey colors, and it's the same politics. We're getting tax hikes out of these people. We're not getting forward leadership, especially out of the governor's office right now. I'm jealous of all these other governors. They're doing innovative stuff, and we've got a sweet lady who everybody loves, but we're not doing anything. She's warming a seat, and that'll be a red-hot race, we think, in 26. But I'm as frustrated with those guys as I am anything in Washington.
100%. And again, it's like if you're going to put that jersey on, you need to behave that way. And if you're not,
it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's crazy. So, no, I think it is. It's just kind of going over some good statistics for the audience to keep track of as they're focusing on what's going on in Montgomery. Like you said, under this governor and under the current setup in the Speaker of the House, you had Mac McCutcheon and Ledbetter. They're very close. They have the same political consultant that kind of does everything in their office, Steve Raby, who I'm pretty sure is a Democrat, right? And under KIV and then Steve Raby's people that he's had in the Speaker's office, we have gotten a gas tax increase.
Yep.
We've gotten medical marijuana. Again, doesn't matter what you think. How many joints have we sold in Alabama? Oh, they still haven't figured it out.
They want to give us what? Suppositories? Did you see that?
Yeah,
peach-flavored suppositories? For some reason, we still can't sell that?
Yeah, unbelievable.
It's dysfunctional.
And then 3 gambling pushes with Medicaid expansion in the last gambling push.
And they would do it again this time.
Majority. Yeah, if they could.
Gambling,
and they
taxes, it's the same stuff.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
We call it teacher union, giving them, trying to get, the dues check off, the dues deduction back out of their checks, and a Republican sponsored that. So, it hurt me to say it because, again, my name was attached to the party and a lot of their candidates for a long time. But I had to divorce myself from that a long time ago. And the show's about that. Some of my worst criticism is for people I actually care about and respect, but I got to call them out. And you do it every day, too. Yep. We have to, if we're going to push forward, somebody's got to push our own people to the right direction. Yeah. So that's our role.
Steve Deace, I went on his show after the Bubba Copeland saga, which, again, thank you for having our back through that whole situation.
Yeah, good for y'all.
You and about 2 other people.
Right is right, man.
That's right. But he said, wow, this is incredible. And so when I started in radio, Steve Deace was the first show I worked with, and I did affiliate relations. He's a syndicated show, so it was my job to call terrestrial radio stations and say, hey, you should carry the Steve Deace show, right? That was my first job in radio. And so I've gotten to know him, love him, and he's like, I kind of, on the podcast, told him, or on his show, told him what we did, and he's like, oh my gosh, you have a news outlet that's punching the legislature from the right? I've never seen this before. And you think about the power that they're used to getting punched from the center or from the left, and so they move center and left. There's no one holding them accountable from the right saying, no, you need to come over here. This is what you ran on. I'm not asking for anything crazy, just the stuff on these cards that I get in my mailbox, all that stuff right there. Right?
The basics. Yeah. See, the thing is, it's all staged. It's a little bit, I've got a throwaway line that I use on the show all the time. DC politics is professional wrestling.
Yeah.
You got a good guy and a bad guy.
Yeah.
And it depends on who you are, is you're a good guy or you're a bad guy. And they got their masks.
Yeah.
And they stage fights and nothing changes.
Yeah.
And then in Montgomery, it's not as professional. It's more like Nacho Libre. It's sort of backyard wrestling, but it's the same fake fight. I literally stood in the Senate hallway where all the deals are done out in the hallway down there, 20 years ago. And I watched a Democrat and Republican laugh I can't say that word. They left their tails off about one was sponsoring a bill that was going to tick off the other's district, and they both get reelected over it. I mean, it's just, they understand that. Yeah. All these gerrymandered districts just cater to their own bases, and that's unfair to children who can't learn, and unfair waste and corruption. And so the beat goes on. But I think there is a different climate right now. Last night was the president's speech to Congress, and it was different than anything I'd ever seen. And what I sense, and I don't mean to put it, and we can go deep, if you want to put it in spiritual terms, I feel like we're in a revival right now. We're having 100% a revival. And you know who doesn't like revival?
Satan.
Devils.
Yeah.
Satan and all his minions and people that just cower at the thought of us getting it together and having integrity and standing for these things. We're going to make mistakes. But if it's not down to freedom and personal responsibility and leaving people along in peace and prosperity, we're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of doing it wrong, and we just got to stay on it. This is our role.
Yep. And thinking about, you brought up the AAA several times, and you think about just the educational issues that we have in our state. And we'll talk a little about some state issues here, and then we're going to switch gears and talk about your last op-ed, because I think that is that's what's at the heart of the revival, is the forgotten working class. The people in your op-ed cover that so beautifully, and so I want to get to that.
Thank you.
But the education system in our state is so horrible. And then you have the Alabama Education Association, which used to run the state under Paul Hubbard and Joe Reed and the Democrats. And Bob Riley got in and made it to where the teachers could no longer get their dues auto drafted. They had to actually sit down and write a check and send it. There's some, and so that basically they lost a ton of power and control from that. And everyone thought the AEA is dead. Well, you own property in the state. I own property in the state. Anytime I cut a vine down that's over on this pole, I come back 2 days later and it's now wrapped around this one, right? And it's just exactly the way that things. And so the AEA spun back up, and now it's got the Republicans in their grasp, despite the ALGOP bylaw saying that they're not supposed to take money. Republican candidates are not supposed to take money from the NEA or any of their state level affiliates, is what the bylaw says, okay? But it doesn't say shall not. And so they're just like swimming in AEA money, like doing the Duck McScrooge thing in the AEA money.
AEA was smart to pivot because money down there and in Washington, it doesn't follow party, it follows power.
Yeah.
And the new Republicans were the new power. We're a one-party state. The Democrats are an abysmal mess.
Yeah.
And so that's even more the reason why folks that think like we do and your audience and others do to hold them accountable, because the lack of competition, the lack of accountability from a real races, none of these incumbents get challenged. They start to feel insulated, and some of them are. They'll take the AAA money, and there's no punishment for it because nobody's going to kick them out of office.
Yeah,
and then it creeps back in like a flood, and we're back in the same shape that we were.
Yeah, and it's all about giving. Like you look at the Ukraine war, and you look at Alabama's education system, and it's the same thing. And it's all money laundering scams. Okay?
All of it. Yeah.
How can we turn the money faucet on? Usually through making people feel guilty or bad. And you're like, well, just turn the money faucet on. I mean, the teachers, they need it. They need it. What's weird, none of the money from the faucet ever gets to the teachers or the students or the classrooms. It gets gobbled up by the bureaucratic redundancy. The more money we give education, the worse they do. Think about that.
Yeah, there's no correlation between per student funding anywhere in the country and results.
Yeah.
It just doesn't exist. Now, I'll give them credit. They got something of a school choice bill. We've got some options 100%. Now that would have been unthinkable in 2009. But it took them almost, 12 years to get it done, 14 years to get it done?
When we started 1819 News, they were diametrically opposed to it. Kay Ivey was never going to do it.
Right.
Was not going to happen. Del Marsh, one of the most powerful senators in the state, for 12 years put together tremendous, excellent. He's not my favorite senator in the world with his gambling stuff and everything else, but he brought a great school choice bill year after year, one of the most powerful senators. He couldn't even get a bill out of committee.
Yep.
That's how diametrically opposed they were. So we got to work exposing the teachers union's stranglehold of the Republican Party. We exposed all the perverts in the public institution and the piss poor performance in these public schools. There's some alliteration there.
That was some nice alliteration. You know I love that.
Kobe. So we exposed those things, and we kind of created our own propaganda circle where we went down here to Cornerstone, that's right down the street here, is this amazing school where they take impoverished black students in an impoverished black neighborhood, and they spend $6,000 a student on these kids, and they're going on to get 25s in their ACTs and higher and getting into STEM and going in up to Huntsville and making $100,000 a year. $6,000 STEM, 25s on the ACTs. State spends $13,000, or the public schools, each one is $13,000 to $14,000. Kids can't read. So you highlight alternatives, expose, highlight alternatives, expose, highlight alternatives. And we did that. And all of a sudden, KI becomes, we're going to be the most school choice friendly state in the nation. Well, hot dang, Miss K.
She's a high stepper.
High stepper.
Listen, here's the good news, though. We're chipping away at it on the local level, on the state level here. We're not as innovative. Arkansas beat us to the punch with this stuff. I mean, we're behind the rest of the Southeast. I think we're, 7th out of the Southeastern states in some of these report card scores. So we can get there. I think we have tremendous education professionals here in the state that know what to do. The good news is I think with Trump now, he's cutting off the head of the snake, the one-size-fits-all bureaucratic system of the education department, the federal education department. If we could get that busted up and block grant that money to the states per capita, whatever, and let the states really experiment. A kid in Fairfield does not come to school with the same tools and has different challenges than a kid over the mountain in Birmingham in Mountain Brook.
Yeah.
It's just there are different innovative ways to teach based on the kid in front of you, not some generic one-size-fits-all system. And that has failed us so repeatedly. And so the more we decentralize some of that thinking, it's not really about money. It is about instruction and curriculum and some of these other ways, and incentivizing the good teachers. Why are they all paid the same?
Yeah.
I mean, that never made sense.
Yeah.
And teachers know this. The hardworking ones that work all weekend grading papers and get in there early and do the extracurricular stuff for no pay and put up with the sass and the attitude, the modern culture of the kids, those teachers should get their pay doubled, and they know who the lazy ones are.
Yeah.
And think of this. You got me on a soapbox.
This is great.
When I was in the 8th grade, I had and I don't mean to call it, I think she's long past, but I had an illiterate English teacher. I had an English teacher that was not functional in the English language. She was hired into our school, and she was a great lady, but could not teach English. The reason I was sat in her class, the same reason every kid around the state in public schools is in the same class. It's because based on my zip code. In that little town, though, we just had one high school, so it was inevitable. You get to 8th grade, you're stuck with that teacher. But we send a kid to a certain class to put them in front of a certain teacher based on where their house is.
Yeah.
It never made any sense.
Yeah.
The kid ought to have options. If there's a better program for the 9th grade year, if the parents got the ability to move and there's incentive and money out there to incentivize more private school instruction or tutoring or any other innovative thing, it can't get worse.
Yeah.
It cannot get worse. I don't know how we got so deeply into
is
this,
great.
but we could go with this for an hour, man.
This is why
we could do this for an hour.
We need to do it for 3 and do the Joe Rogan. You and I can do that. Not all my guests can. A lot of the folks that come in are great. They're subject matter experts or whatever, or even the politicians, but specifically because of radio and TV having a clock, a lot of people are media trained in and it's
short
good,
sound bites.
correct. And the long form thing, I think, is one of my favorite things that's happening right now. Joe Rogan interviewing Donald Trump for 2 hours and 40 minutes, and then JD Vance for 3.5 hours. I don't want anyone running the country who can't do that. If you can't go sit on Joe Rogan and talk to him for 3.5 hours without a commercial break, just go.
You don't have the intellectual capacity.
Correct, and you don't really know what the hell you're doing.
Yeah. Look, from my TV days, when we do a news story, say when I was a field reporter, we go out in the field, that story's 90 seconds long. There's a anchor read and a 90-second package, we call it, and then a 10-second tag. Yeah. So basically you got 2 minutes of the newscast. There's only 12 minutes of news in a 30-minute newscast. And in that 90 seconds, if you got to get two sides, you're lucky to get 2 10-second sound bites from each side, and there's your story. Yeah. That's the job. Now, all that's changed. Years ago, when I got out of television and I'd go around and get to speak to particularly political groups about communication, I would tell them, media is getting democratized. Little did I know we'd have social media to this level. We'd have free speech fights over censorship. We get back to a neutral place where you can hear a 3-hour interview. That just didn't exist. Yeah. Larry King probably had the most long form format that was watched in the country. And he was a good interview because he would ask a question and shut up. Yeah. A lot of the cable news guys, especially on Fox, they don't know how to. Hannity interrupts everybody. They don't know how to. Ingram, good guys, glad for their success, but I can't get anything out of their guests. Yeah. The new media is doing it in a better way. And if you don't want to sit there for 3 hours, don't sit there for 3 hours. But some people get engrossed in it, and that's how you learn. You got to learn by putting the time in. Yeah.
And think of how many more people have a deeper understanding of what's actually going on versus just hearing the think tank talking points. And not that there's anything wrong with Seinfeld. Not that there's anything wrong. But they were formed that way because that was how you had to do it. But now, if you want to sit and listen to a person talk about like what we're about to talk about here in a minute, as far as open markets and global economies and what we were promised versus what actually happened, and why is it that neocons think that we can export export America to the third world and it's just going to work, and then we can import the third world to America and it's just going to work, like where. Those type of things, and you sit and listen to someone for 3.5 hours and understand where that whole political philosophy came from, and it actually came from after World War II. It's called the post-war consensus. And you're just like, and you can't learn that in small sound bites. So and you mentioned the democratization. I call it the decentralization. Same thing, the decentralization of mass media, and people having the ability to choose. Because at first it was ABC, CBS, NBC, then you had Fox and CNN, and then MSNBC. But if you're a power broker, you're Pfizer or whatever, you just go give all of them millions of dollars and then you don't have to worry about anything. Sure. It's centralized. Yep. When you decentralize it, now you can't. And so you're like, Facebook censor, Twitter censor. And then Elon bought Twitter
And to me, when Elon bought Twitter, mixed with what Joe Rogan was doing, mixed with Tucker getting fired from Fox, all at like that same time, it was this perfect storm that like freed media and information.
Philosophically, another part of that model you just described of the way the old media does it, and I was in it. It was a good most part of my life. What we got to remember, it was always entertainment.
Yeah.
And entertainment converts to business, and that's the only reason it's there.
Yeah.
It's really not free speech or digging deep or being informative.
Yeah.
It's just about entertaining, keeping eyeballs on the screens. And to this day, it's still that way. The difference now, though, is information can be entertaining in a long format. Educating yourself and getting edified from a host or a podcaster or whatever that you trust is entertaining. And it can be both. And it can also be because of the model of the new media. And even us, we still consider ourselves in our format an alternative space. Even that can be profitable. You can make money on it and sustain it so it can be there and people can still learn.
Yeah.
I just mentioned the time frame. In my TV days, the whole television station for a 30-minute newscast had 12 minutes of news. In my show, I get a segment is about 12 minutes, and I do 16 of those a day.
Yeah.
We have 16 times the content, and it's a lot of opinion than your average newscast. And that's a long time. And when you got your fingers on the pulse, you get calls and feedback. You can't let that – you read data, but you don't just go by that, and you get the tone from – callers that call in, especially the smart ones.
Yeah.
There's some dumb ones and
fun,
some drunk ones
and
entertaining ones. But you get a sense of things every single day and it kind of coalesces in your mind. And then I think you're a little bit closer to the people that way.
100%. It's no, in radio, again, that's my background. It's a great medium. And I think that it was the only medium that wasn't captured. If you think about that, specifically on the independent side.
Yeah.
Independently owned news talk radio stations was one place that truth could be when everything else was being censored, centralized, and cut off. So, love radio. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I've got a million other things I want to talk to you about on state political stuff, but I'm just going to dive into what I promised we would give the listeners. You wrote an op-ed for us, which is always my favorite thing when you write op-eds for us, and I mean that.
Thank you.
There was the one when with Katie Britt, and she was going to vote for Thune or Cornyn or whatever. I called you, and I'm like, hey, man.
Yeah, you asked for that one.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. I did. And buddy, you delivered. Holy smokes. And I think you talked about it for like 4 hours on your show that day as well.
People wanted to know why I wrote that.
Yeah.
That piece, and I don't have to revisit it because people can go and read it on your site. But it wasn't animosity toward her.
No.
Full disclosure, I'm married to a woman that actually ran against her for a moment for that seat, but she supports her better than I do because she knows her and I don't know her. The problem is right now we're in an age of authenticity in politics, and that's everything. And we saw that last night. And when I refer to that, I know this will play later, but the president spoke to Congress the day before we're doing this interview. And so I've never found her to be very authentic, and I'm very distrustful of this system as we're trying to disassemble the money system and the central characters, the old Mitch McConnell crowd that are buying controllable senators for the United States Senate. We sold our Senate seat. And it's not a shot at her personally because she's probably a lovely young lady, Katie Britt, that I would get along with if we were in the same room. And believe it or not, I've never met her.
Yeah.
Despite our show and her success, we've just never crossed paths. But the way they dump money, some estimates are $25 million into this state to control that seat, and dumped on two very good patriotic men in Mo Brooks and Mike Durant. I know politics is fair game, but they ran over those guys in an unfair way with Washington's money, and I still believe Washington controls that seat.
Yeah.
I don't care how many cute
it's an
videos.
appropriation seat.
Yeah, it's
an appropriation seat.
And
like
they know that.
Yeah, they had to win that.
And it's a little bit of my own political experience of working in D.C. It's you see the chess board. It's not a daily, a lot of folks just react to every daily soundbite and what they said on NBC or what attention-seeking congressperson said about another one and that childish stuff. There's a big picture fight going on in that town, and we're starting to get the edge on it. And Alabama, of all states, shouldn't be contributing to the wrong side of that system. And we may be about to get another Senate race. If Tuberville decides to jump in the governor's race, that's going to be another open Senate race. Craziness, man.
Yeah, let's talk about that before we dive into the other thing.
Okay, let's go.
What are your thoughts on Tuberville? Do you think Ainsworth stays in? He tweeted today that he's been eating his Wheaties and he's running. You know, he's got his running gear on and he's got the box of the Michael Jordan Wheaties. He said, "I've been eating my Wheaties and running," and he's going to run. I've heard that if Tuberville ran, he wasn't going to run. So I don't know what this is. I don't know how anybody beats Tuberville. I don't think it's possible.
Yeah. Ainsworth shouldn't be eating Wheaties. He should be eating toast because he's toast if Tuberville gets in this period. Now, that's a function of not just I've come to really like Coach. I barely knew him before. You know, when I was first impressed with him, as opposed to Britt, he walks into the studio to interview during his race. He didn't have an entourage.
Yeah.
Here's a guy who could pay for his own entourage. He just walked in on his own. Some guy drove him. And he didn't ask for preview questions, didn't want to know what I wanted to talk about. And he's not a policy guy, but he sat down and went back and forth with me. And during the breaks, he wasn't just checking his phone and talking to his aides. Like you've interviewed people that do that, and they're off on the side trying to figure out what they should say or what they said wrong in the last segment. They're not even engaged with you.
Yeah.
We just sat there and chewed the fat. I got to know him as a person. So I thought this guy has an outside skill set outside of Washington that can bring a different perspective on how they do things. The people with the entourage of guys with little portfolios in their suits, and I used to be one of those, an aide, you know, all those guys, they can't think for themselves. That's why you get 30-something Democrat senators all reading the same script on television into a camera because somebody told them, say this, these are your words today. And we need more people that think. And he seemed to kind of think for himself. And he took the heat on that abortion issue with the Department of Defense.
So we gave him the award for him.
Yeah, I mean, the guy, he didn't have to do that. And it showed me he didn't care if he got reelected or not. On principle, he would take the heat. And that we need more of that attitude. Now, back to the governor's race, just as a function of the mechanics of a campaign, name identification is worth at least, if you're statewide name identified, my guess is that's a $10 to $12 million value.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example of that. When Bob Riley ran in 2002, and I was with him in Congress, but when we decided to launch and run for governor against the sitting lieutenant and sitting governor, he had about 13% name ID and statewide. Nobody knew who he was. He was just some congressman off in rural Alabama. And I tracked our polling versus our spending, and it's not a direct correlation, but we were in 22 years ago, we were at about the 10 or $11 million mark before we caught up to the other two in recognition.
Yeah.
Now, they may not like you, but they got to at least know you.
Yeah.
Tuberville, before he ever ran for office, already had that from being the football coach. So that's an advantage. He'd be able to raise money toe-to-toe with anybody in the state after he's kind of established now. He's got a network around him to do that. Nobody else on the state level has that name ID. Not even the sitting lieutenant governor. They don't.
No.
I don't personally know him, but they don't know who he is out there in the world.
His development. So he came in. He went to D.C. It's like anybody else who's new to D.C., specifically someone who's coming from football into politics.
Yeah.
It's the whole idea. Like you don't even know where the bathroom is. You know what I mean? Like you're so new and you're so fresh. And he didn't come out, firing on all 8 cylinders because how could you? And then I think he probably got screwed by McConnell, or I don't know what happened. I don't know the details, but he finally saw things for what they were. And from that moment forward, he has been absolutely resolved to just be Yosemite Sam up there. And it's been amazing
because he doesn't have to be there, and he doesn't really want to be there. This isn't his defining success of his whole life. For a lot of them, it's the biggest thing they've ever done. Is getting elected to some national office in a low turnout election where they were the lesser of two evils. I mean, that's their big claim to fame, and then they get caught up in it, and they get the gold pin, and they're surrounded by staff. It's intoxicating. I've watched them. And they sell out, and the name of that game, as you know, is don't get in trouble. Talk big, but really don't do anything that's going to buck the system. And we'll give you all the money you need. You'll never have an opponent. And then we get stuck with whoever this is. And as they stay every year, we've got less and less influence over our own representatives because they feel completely insulated from us until they decided to retire. That's a horrible system. Horrible system.
Yeah, so it's going to be interesting, and I'm friends with Will. I'm friends with Coach Tuberville. I love them both. Think the world of both of them. Think they would both do a phenomenal job. But it's like you said, from just a pure logistics and standpoint of that much name ID. And what I like about Will and Coach both, they both have their own money. they're not becoming the governor so that they can get rich. They're already rich. Like both of them are already rich, which is interesting.
Well, and then that's where, I mean, look, if I didn't know, and I don't know, again, Ainsworth and the difference between the two, if I didn't have an opinion about their politics, just the thing I just described, if as a consultant, the mechanics alone, I would tell Ainsworth to go somewhere else. Yeah. I told Kay Ivey that in 2010, she was running for governor. And I analyzed it with her campaign manager. They came onto my radio show. That was the first year of this show. And I said, you should run in the lieutenant governor's race. And I said, that's a more open seat that was so crowded. They had Tim James and Bradley and Bentley and all those guys were crowding that race out. So she said she'd think about it. And then when she decided, she went and announced that on my show. I'm not taking responsibility for the Kay Ivey tenure.
Yeah, it's your fault.
But I'm saying sometimes you just got to find a better lane to be in, and I think there's going to be a lot of that analysis going 100%. Forward.
I mean, he could run for Senate. There's a lot of different things. So
that'll be wide open. Yeah, 2 big seats.
That'll be interesting, and but I'll be interested to see what Tuberville would do as a governor. It's a different world. DC is a different world. You have clear enemies that are Democrats that hate you, that are communists. Then you have a few Republicans that are trying to stab you in the back as well. Yeah. But you're there with Trump, and you're basically, elbow to elbow in the shield wall with Trump.
Yeah, for short term.
Yeah, for at least the next 2 years. But, right now that's a lot more clear than you come into Alabama where everybody knows everybody, and it's like it's going to be a matter of, will Coach surround himself with the right people? Who is his team going to be? Who's his chief of staff going to be? Who is he going to surround himself that's going to help him get the lay of the land? Because once Coach figures out the lay of the land, he'll be fine. But I think he's only going to do 4 years. I don't think he's going to go for 8. I think he's only going to do 4. So he needs to, very much like Trump 2.0, hit the ground running, get a plan put together, get put in front of him. These are the things. This is what we need to do with corrections. This is what we need to do with education. This is what we need to do with ADEM. This is what we need to do, that kind of stuff, to where he has a plan where he's agreeing, yep, this is what we need to do, this is what we need to do, this is what we need to do, and he hits the ground running. If he has the right people around him, he can do that. If not, there's going to be coming in like, well, we got to get gambling passed, Coach. And that's what you're going to run into. And so it'll be very interesting to see how this develops. We'll obviously be monitoring it closely.
It'll be good content for the next 2 years for sure.
Right.
And that's the thing too, races now are 2 years long.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a 2-year commitment to run for an office. And so some of those decisions will happen sooner rather than later.
If you're running a ministry or you own a business, my guess is that you've been thinking about starting a podcast for a while now, but for various reasons it hasn't happened yet. Send me an email. I need to personally connect you with Yonder Child Media. They built this studio in 2 days and tackle all of the production. I just come in, start talking, and leave. It's that easy. They do everything else. Whether you want to record at your business or a home office like they just built for me, you come in, start talking, and Yonder Child will do everything else. Send me an email. That's going to be Bryan, Brian.Dawson, Dawson, at 1819news.com, and I'd be happy to personally connect you.
The op-ed.
Okay.
I get derailed really easy. Can you tell
that's
that?
Okay. I'll steer you back. We both do this. I'll get you back.
That's right. All right.
Where you want to go?
So I want to go into shutting down the DC factory, because I think, what really hit my soul, like I grew up in a little suburb of Wichita, Kansas called Derby. Mm-hmm. My dad worked at Cessna, and my dad grew up, and I talk about my dad a lot on the show because he is my window into the working class. He's my window into the populist. Okay. He grew up in West Monroe, Louisiana with Phil Robertson, okay? And the only people more poor than the Dawsons was Robertson. My dad didn't have a dad. He was the oldest of 4 children, and he had to hunt for food to provide for his family back when poor people were skinny. That was how my dad grew up, okay? And so he gets into kind of he worked for Texas Instruments for a little bit, and then he moves to Wichita, and he works at Cessna, and he's there for 18 years or 25 years. I don't know what it was. It was a long time. And he was what's called a floor engineer. And so Cessna was smart enough to say, hey, we're getting these people coming out of college that supposedly have the right whatever, but we have these guys who've been doing inspection on the floor for 10 years. We need to move them into these engineering positions because they've had their hands on it. And so Cessna had a ton of floor engineers, which my dad was. And he went from probably making $30,000 a year to where he was now making $120,000 a year, had a pension, had all the things that he'd worked his tail off for. And in 2008, when everything crashed, in come the East Indians, okay? And what they said was like, oh, well, we at Cessna have decided that we're not going to have floor engineers anymore. We need people that are more qualified. We need degreed engineers. So the floor engineers did not have a degree. we need degreed engineers. And so the degreed engineers all came in and they were named Raj and, you know, a lot of Patels and that kind of a thing. They came in and my dad had to train them all until they were trained, and then he got let go. Yeah. So he had to train his replacement from someone who was supposedly more qualified that was probably working 100 hours a week for $70,000 a year versus my dad who worked for 60 and made 120, right? Mm-hmm. Because of their high technical skill. The whole H-1B visa thing is just unbelievable. Based off your op-ed, I think I know where you are on that one. But you really hit the nail on the head from your own personal experience of, you know, now we're watching all these government people getting fired and they want our sympathy, and it's like, you know, learn how to code. That was great. So talk about that.
Oh man, without reciting the whole piece, and I invite people to come read it on your site as well. It was really from a rant I did on the air. Sometimes you've got me wanting to write, and I love writing, but I haven't done it in years, and now you guys have the outlet, and you've given me that invitation. So I got done with some red-faced rant about these. I was so indignant about the people in Washington being indignant that they were being held accountable. And this was in the very first days of Doge starting to cut and some of the protests. And I thought about my own people and went through this long rant. And at the end of that, I went to a commercial break and thought, I should just write that. I should just write that for Bryan and the 1819 folks. And so I reached out and said, I think I want to write that. And so that was the genesis of it. It was just from everything I do is just off the cuff on the air in the moment. But it does go back to your roots. You talked about your roots. I grew up in a little place in a little small town called Roanoke, Alabama. I sort of had a couple of hometowns. My parents were divorced when I was young. And so I had sort of two hometowns. But Roanoke's where I built my formative years. And we lived in a part of town called the Mill Village. And in those days, there would be a central factory. And the factory would actually build housing for the workers in the 20s and 30s. And nice little cute little white sideboard houses. Yeah. And that mill built the town. The town was built around it. And that was way before my time. I came along in those years. At the end of that, the mill had gone out of business. And when I was a kid, I remember sitting there. It was literally on top of the hill from the house, and I could see the smokestacks and the bats flying in and out. And I always wondered what it must have been like in that area when you had that economy. Now, America's a wealthy nation. A lot of towns like that. There were steel industry towns. You know the Billy Joel song Allentown? That was a theme through the 80s and 90s. Yeah. Things are falling apart. We don't know why. But really what happened to us and being involved in public policy, I know firsthand that it's a lot of bad government decisions that ran the jobs off. Even though these people campaign on jobs, it was things like NAFTA, where our folks in rural America, blue-collar America, up through Appalachia and into the Midwest, we were told there are better jobs in the future. You guys don't want to do this kind of work. We'll bring in the better jobs. We're going to do this with slave labor somewhere else. Just hang on, we'll train you. And it was just like Joe Biden telling the coal miners to learn to code. And those jobs never came. Now, slowly we did get some. It took 20 years, but we finally got auto factories, and some of that is being replaced. But their model was slow, and a lot of people got eaten in that. And the depression that it left in the South. I think it was J.D. Vance wrote in Hillbilly Elegy a similar theme that, you know, what remained were blight and plywood and addiction that took over, especially in Appalachia, because there wasn't the core job that gave people the dignity of work. When you've got a factory, you've got a bank, and you got a dry cleaner, and you got a hardware store and a flower shop. And that was my downtown. We had a main street. A barbershop with the pole. A barbershop with a little round pole that spun. I read about that. And it was just Mayberry growing up, even though it was on the tail end of that factory. But slowly everything left. A lot of those buildings are gone. There's plywood everywhere. Small town America got eaten alive. Then Walmart comes in and takes everything away. I mean, you don't have a chance to compete as a retailer against a big box store in a little town. So the retail gets sucked up. The town loses its identity, and it's happened. That story is replicated a million times all around the country. And again, it goes back to a lot of DC policy decisions on taxes, on spending. Just recently alone, the stuff that Biden did ran the value of the dollar down. That affected other businesses that went out of business in little parts of America. The bringing in all the illegals to replace the workers. You mentioned it earlier. What we couldn't send over there, we brought foreigners in to do the jobs here. And where does that leave people in the middle? And it doesn't. It doesn't give opportunity. There's always opportunity in any small trade area when there's a core industry, when you're making things that produces income that comes into the trade area, and then you get everything that follows. The opposite of that's what we've been doing for 30 years. And so, again, back to it being a lot of Washington decision making, and now they want us to feel bad for them because their insulated bubble that they've lived in for these generations, and I've been around all these people, the housing markets in D.C. never took a hit when we went through the dot-com crash and the big housing crash in 2008 and the COVID pandemic. Their values stayed fine because they were guaranteed their money. They confiscate it from us, launder it among themselves, and then point their fingers at us that we should be sympathetic when that gets busted up. So the theme of that piece was their factories being shut down now. They've been told there are layoffs and pink slips. And it's just hard for us to be sympathetic for that. They're going to have to retool their skills and find something else to do because we can't afford it anymore.
Man. And I'm reading a book right now called Return of the Strong Gods by R.R. Reno, who is the editor of First Things. And he's going into where all of this came from. It wasn't just happenstance. It wasn't just greed. It was actually a response to World War I and World War II, and basically just the absolute destruction on young men, the amount of people who were slaughtered from 1917 to 1945. And come to the end of those wars, and they're like, okay, well, what was the cause? What caused this? What can we blame this on so that we can make sure it never happens again? Well, and they said, well, it's obviously hierarchy, authoritarianism, ordered loves, which you hear J.D. Vance talking about now, the order amoris, which is ordered loves, which is, as a father, I'm responsible to my wife and children before I'm responsible to some guy in some third world country. This way of thinking where you're very much about your community, you're about your state, you're about your nation, and this is how it's done. You build a mill in a town and everyone flourishes off of that. And there's a bunch of that, colonizing, whatever. And they label that fascism, which is not what fascism is, but any form of hierarchical authoritarianism that's rooted in natural loves and affections of your people in your place. That was blamed for what happened from 1917 to 1945 and the loss of life. And so they said, okay, well then that's a closed society and we need an open society. You've heard that term, open society. That's
sure.
George Soros' foundation is called Open Society.
Exactly.
And it was this whole idea where we can't have borders anymore. We can't have nations anymore because nationalism is scary and nations are bad. We need a global economy where everything is for everybody and it's all egalitarian. There's no hierarchy. Everybody's the same. Men are women are men, right? Every different people group is exactly the same. And the problem was, I think they really believed this, like it was almost like a form of like mental illness or something. And so they slowly began to chip away this idea of local production, like you talked about that mill that was in your town. And that's where the idea of global economies and moving manufacturing over here so that these people can have opportunity and then moving these people in. And what they wanted to destroy is it's just the truth. The United States of America is a Western European Protestant country. Okay. It's what it was founded as. And that doesn't mean that other people can't be here, but they want to demolish our sense of national identity. They don't want us to like who we are. They tell us our heroes are villains, like this whole thing. Like you, and I know
it's Orwell.
Yeah, it's very Orwellian what they've done. But it's called the post-war consensus. This book has been unbelievable. So reading The Death of the West kind of got me into this by Pat Buchanan, and then now reading Reno and seeing, it's been very, very eye-opening. But it is this idea that we need to send manufacturing abroad. Import the third world, because we're really trying to, not only are we trying to get cheap labor, not only are we trying to maximize profits, not only are we, trying to, basically have a voter base, right? Replace the electorate, but we also want to destroy any sense of Western European Christian national identity whatsoever. It needs to be destroyed because that's authoritarian and it has hierarchy and that's scary. We can't have that. Look at the Muslims in Europe right now. Absolutely, just anyway, I'm gonna let you talk.
Well, no, I agree 100%. Can I go broader than that?
Yeah,
because I think that even speaks to what's happening in Ukraine right now. Can I? Yeah. How much time do we have?
Let's go.
I'll go fast.
Yeah.
As the more I study it, and I had an obsession with the Soviet Union because I grew up in the 80s and studied the language and the history, and so had a deep knowledge of Ukraine before any of this stuff ever happened, before the Soviet Union broke up. I had a teacher from Ukraine in college that taught me a lot about that place, and I actually have some extended family from there. So this Ukraine situation is not how it's been presented, obviously. And it's gotten us into something that's way bigger than just Ukraine itself. And along the lines of the globalist theory and what you just said, the open society concept, if you and I were going to do that 20 years ago, we were going to take over the world, erase the borders, and control everything. If that's the goal, the pockets of resistance were always going to be two things, not just the West, but Russia.
Putin and Trump.
Russia is a massive country that goes back thousands of years, that has an identity that would never go along with this.
Yes.
And we are from, as I heard Giorgia Meloni, the prime minister of Italy the other day say, their country has been founded on Roman law, Greek philosophy, and Christian values. And that was powerful to me because that's the West.
Yeah.
And we had a right to our identities, and it's not just about a subversion of us. They've weaponized humans with these mass migration waves.
Yeah.
We were so myopic in the United States, we thought it was just something happening to us.
Yeah.
They're doing the same things in Europe with the same operation, the same NGOs.
Yeah.
They pick them up off the coast of Africa in a boat, dump them on an island called Lampedusa. That's the closest EU nation. Once they get foot on that island, they can go into the entire EU, and you see what's happened. They're a smaller population, and they've been inundated in even greater ways, and it's changing culture. The goal of these people was to stop resistance, okay?
Yeah,
to stop resistance, you got to stop people that have Western values.
Yeah.
Western civilization will fight you over this stuff. We know that because we've been fighting each other over this stuff for centuries. And so to get rid of the Western resistance, they used the human wave, destabilization, things like climate change, that destabilizes economies. Years ago, my belief is, and I've done some reading on this, they knew they can't. There's some areas they don't care to control. So they were willing to let China have Asia. They decided Iran was the best tool to use to control that world, the Persian world, the Arab world.
Yeah.
They're willing to empower Iran. You can see this in Obama's policies, in the EU policies. They appease Iran. They appease China. They crash into the West and try to erase everything about our ethnicity, our history, our heritage, our continuity, our pride, our social fabric, break that up, dominate us, erase those borders, and then that group of people fights a big war with Russia. We were the power they always wanted to use to beat back the Russians. The Russian military is weak. The technology is bad. They've got a lot of bodies, but they've not invested the way they should post-Cold War.
Yeah.
And Putin was vulnerable to this. So they have slowly tried to get us into a war with them. And that's the path we were on. We kept expanding NATO. We did a color revolution in 2014 in UT.
Yes.
Put our own people in, then started bombing the same side of Ukraine that Russia's bombing right now, the Donbass region.
Yeah.
All of these were provocative acts to trigger Putin to do something so that we could go to war with him.
Yeah.
And eventually they thought Europe and the United States could beat him. Then they could control the whole thing. That's how they were looking at the world map 20 years ago, planning this stuff. And we have fallen for it until the last 2 or 3 months, and all that just started ending.
That was the best summary of the whole thing I've heard.
I had to go fast. We're running out of time.
This is great. We'll keep going. That's the beauty of it. The CIA is known. I didn't realize it was a bunch of trannies doing weird sexual stuff on chats and stuff. I actually thought it was James Bond, but apparently it's just a bunch of weirdos.
It's not
But
007.
whatever they look like and whatever they are, what they do to destabilize is they do regime change. That is what they specialize in, is in regime change all over the country all the time. What we experienced in 2020 was a regime change in the United States of America. What we're seeing in Ukraine, because it's the same thing. Trump popped up and it's like, we have resistance in the West. We thought we had the West, right?
Yep.
Now the West is going to start resisting again.
Yep.
Got to regime change it. And then Lindsey Graham, Pound Fox, we got to shoot Putin. We got to kill Putin, right? And it's the same thing.
Yep.
They were trying to do a regime change in Russia so that they could have it all.
They've got to take.
They can't have resistance.
And Trump what they're trying to resist is anything that resembles nationalism.
Correct.
And so, but what they really is provoke nationalism. So we've rediscovered it. Hungary's rediscovered it. Argentina's rediscovered it. Italy's rediscovered it.
It's a beautiful
Poland's
thing.
looking at it. These countries want to eat their food, have their language, have their economy, their commerce, their borders, their industry, and be proud of that. And there's nothing wrong with that at all.
Look at that. I mean, that is the
And you know what's going on in Canada right now? Trump is trying to get them to wake up to nationalism. So he's poking them. And now all of a sudden the Canadians are like, we're Canadians. And it's like, yes, that's what we want you to be. It's freaking Canadians.
Even Poilievre is.
Oh my gosh, he's amazing.
And the thing is, that country too is kind of two countries. There's a French side that's much more amenable to Europe and liberalism. And then there are the folks over in Alberta in the mountains and the cowboys that are just, I mean, you can't tell the difference between Montana and Alberta.
Yeah.
I drove through there a couple of summers ago in the motorhome and was really refreshed by that. And these people have so much in common with us. There are a group of them that are now petitioning to break that part of Canada off and join that part of Canada to the United States, which would be great because we wouldn't get 2 more Democrat senators out of it. But who knows? I mean, it's not even a divide and conquer strategy. Trump is trying to recoalesce. And what he knows is the biggest race in facing mankind right now, beyond all this philosophical stuff we're facing, is a technical race over AI and supercomputers and super AI and the chips. Now, to do that, you got to have the companies, you got to have the investment, the infrastructure, and the rare earth. So Trump has prioritized the rare earth and getting this investment here. And he's in 43 days, they've had, $2.7 trillion in announced investment potential coming into the country. And that's his obsession with Greenland. Greenland has one of the largest rare earth deposits, things we need to make the tech. If we don't get to it, China's been beating us to it in Africa for years. They've been loan sharking Africa to get access to the rare earth. They do the Belt and Road thing where they go in and loan an impoverished country money. The country takes it, then they can't pay the loan, and the Chinese call in the loan, and they own the rare earth. And they're doing that all over the place. And we're playing catch up to that. Because they're the competitor. If anybody's going to beat us to AI and this new world that I hate, I want to go live on a mountain. I watched Terminator 3. I don't like it. I don't want Skynet.
Yeah.
But it's coming, and we don't have any choice in it. And to keep it from eating us alive, we got to control it. And Trump, I don't think he's a tech guy, but he's listening to smart people, and they're telling him if we're not going to get buried by technology, we better get ahead of this. Is the new space race. The space race was symbolic. It was just really who's the superior technical country between us and the Soviets to get to the moon. This is bigger. This is life and death. It really is. You cannot overstate the importance of us being ahead of everything on this.
So we're going to do an overtime segment where we continue diving into this and talk about who is Trump listening to, who he's surrounded himself with, what your thoughts are on basically this first 6 weeks or whatever it's been since the inauguration, and why. And so we're going to be doing that. And you can only have access to that if you're a paying member. So you go to the website, 1819news.com. At the top, there's a button that says become a member. Click that. Membership start as little as $5 a month. Go do that now so you can hear the rest of this conversation. This has been great, Leland.
Good to be here.
I feel like I want to do this all the time.
Only if you'll come on my show today.
All right.
Because we got a lot to do this afternoon. I want you to come on and talk to my folks.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome.
Right, good stuff.
Good deal. All right.
Thanks, Bryan.
Well, that'll wrap it up for this week. And as always, put your trust in God and keep your powder dry.